Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Little Fella Sports Podcast. As you can see, we're joined by Sanket and Gurkirat with us today. Obviously, two guys who've been on the show many a times before. So, first of all, I'd like to welcome Sanket and Gurkirat to the show. And whoever's watching, I hope you guys are doing safe and sound at the moment.
Thank you, Anirudh. Good to be back.
Yeah,
It's been
good to
some
be.
time, I think around 2 months, but yeah, good to be back.
And
Yeah, good to
with
be
that,
back. Like,
yeah. And first things first, guys. If you're watching, it'll be great if you can subscribe to the channel. We've crossed 500, but it'll be great if any of you who is watching if hasn't subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe to the channel. And now on to what we're going to discuss today. One of the most important or key parts, according to many a fan. I'm not trying to distinguish between fans here, but in general perception is that captaincy has a massive role to play in the performance of each of the teams. For example, someone like Gautam Gambhir often says that the captain is only as good as his team, for example, but many a time we've seen that a captain can change the fortunes of the team as well. So we're here to discuss about how much of a factor captaincy plays in cricket in general across different formats, and as well as the fact that what defines a good captain, what defines a captain who's not that good. So we start off with Gurkirat here. So Gurkirat, what does the word captaincy really mean to you? I mean, how do you look at captaincy in cricket? It does not necessarily have to be across different formats, but just when it comes to captaincy, what does it really mean to you?
See, there are captains in other games as well. There's a captain in football. There's a captain in hockey. There are captains in other team games as well. But I think the only one game that you can say is probably like which is a captain's game is cricket, because the captain does have some influence. I'm not talking of influence in selecting the 11, because I'm sure the other captains in other sports also have that influence. I'm talking about controlling the game, especially when you're a fielding captain, when you're fielding. So definitely captaincy has its effect on the game of cricket, and a good captain is always helpful. But what I've always believed is that the shorter the format, the more important is the captaincy. Because see, if you're playing test cricket, if you are a better quality side, I think 95 to 97, 98 times out of 100, your side will come out on top, because the game is very long for quality to reign supreme. A good captain would be able to probably win a session through a few tactics, but without the quality, it is difficult to win a test match, which is why you really don't see too many upsets in test matches. The shorter the format, the more upsets you see, because that is where a one over, or a small phase or a small period of time in the game can actually affect the result, which is where captaincy becomes that more important. So I think when it comes to the impact of captaincy, it's greatest in T20 and least in test matches. But it's not to say that the captaincy becomes irrelevant or redundant in test matches. As you've seen with someone like a Virat Kohli over the last 4 5 years, it's not that the results that he has had speak for him as a captain. Because if anyone has followed his career trajectory as a captain since 2015, a lot would say that probably the first 2 years he was a very erratic captain, would keep on changing 11s, will not probably look for consistency or anything, but India still managed to win. That is because the quality of the side was so good. So it's about a lot of factors. I think it's also about a lot of factors off field, especially in cricket, where how you're grooming a player, how you're setting up a culture. India never had a culture where fast bowlers used to be the talk of the town or used to reign supreme. So that is where Virat Kohli deserves credit. I think that is his legacy as a captain. His legacy, cannot be defined by the series win in Australia, or even if India say do well in World Test Championship. I think his legacy is going to be defined by the fast bowling culture and the culture of fitness that has been inculcated in Indian cricket in Test matches purely. I think he's a better Test captain than what he is in say limited overs, because in Test matches also one thing that he doesn't do is he doesn't really tend to follow the ball. In limited overs cricket, he's really sometimes followed the ball. Okay, the boundary's been hit at this place, I'll place a fielder there. This is something that he's really not done in test matches, and has had very good fields. So I judge captaincy in these things, because I think uh, using results to to judge captaincy isn't the right way, because sometimes you can do everything right but still lose the game because the opposition has played better. Two, a captain only, or a single player only makes 9% of the team. Okay, if you say that, even say someone's a captain and sort of, say that's an additional role, you'd say that he's doing two roles. So 2 out of 12 is just 1 by 6 of the team. So that's only 16%. So 16% of an individual, or 16% of a contribution, is not going to change the result of a game massively. So I think this whole narrative, which is sort of controlled as to, a good captain is one who's had more wins, is something that doesn't really sit well with me, because a captain can only sort of, put the right tactics. You can plan your bowlers overs well, but if your bowlers aren't going to perform, or if your bowlers are not going to able to execute the yorkers or the right kind of deliveries at the important stages, a captain can't do much. So I think just the way we look at captaincy, we need to change that. It cannot be solely on results, because one, it is based on hindsight. Two, like I said, a captain can't really massively influence results. He will only make at best 16% of the team combination.
Yeah, Gurkis, I actually completely agree with you. There's only so much a captain can do, as you mentioned, especially the fact that in Test cricket, it's often that quality ends up beating the other opposition, because, as you mentioned, it's very unlikely that you see upsets in Test cricket compared to white ball, whether it's one days or T20s, where you're likely to see a lot more upsets than in Test cricket. And as you mentioned, there's only so much of a contribution or so much of value a captain can provide to his team. More often, as you mentioned, whether it's the bowlers or the batsmen, they have to go out there and perform at the end of the day. But there are factors around whether a bowler and batsman can perform, and that's the team culture, as you mentioned, in terms of backing a player, in terms of providing confidence that even if you don't do well for a couple of games, you've still got all these games after that for you to go out and perform, so you can play freely, whether it's a batsman or a bowler. So there are there is definitely a value when it comes to captaincy, but as you mentioned, there's only so much a captain can do, and often things are looked at hindsight. Because, for example, a decision which on the outside before the event happens it may not look great, but it turns out to be great. I mean, it turns out to work well. That does not suddenly mean that he's made one masterclass of a decision, right? It could potentially be a decision where he got slightly lucky, because at the end of the day, even as captain, you need to be a little lucky, whether it's with your bowlers getting a little bit of luck, your batsman getting that little bit of luck. So you need a little bit of luck, but there's only so much you can control in that way. So yeah, I completely agree with what you said. Going on
You
to
know,
Sanket, yeah, tell me.
yeah, I've brought this up, like you said, a change in the playing 11 doesn't, become great just after the result. I remember before the fourth test at Gaba, everyone was talking that Kuldeep should play, Kuldeep should play, Kuldeep should play. Kuldeep wasn't played. Everyone was criticizing Rahane and Shastri. Okay, they've not selected the right 11, etc., etc. Then Washington and Shardul uh, gave impactful performances, and when they won, then, out of nowhere, Ajinkya Rahane became the latest captain in 5 days. So it doesn't happen like that. So that's why I say that captaincy should never be judged in hindsight.
Yeah, I agree. So going out to you, Sanket, your thoughts on captaincy, and what do you think it generally, what kind of role do you think it generally plays in a game of cricket? You can take instances or even look at it across different formats as well.
See, I think the role of a captain, I think that can vary widely from team to team. Like if you look at India, and the captain has always been the boss. Like particularly since ever since I started following cricket, like which is when Ganguly took over the captaincy, I think it's somewhere around 2000. He was the man. Like he had the final word on everything, whether it was team selection, tactics, and all that. And that's one of the reasons why he gets often gets credited with some of the youngsters that he brought into the side, like the likes of Zaid Khan, Yuvraj, Sehwag, and all those guys. Then it was Rahul Dravid who took over, and then I think you could probably say there was probably some sort of decentralization of power between Rahul Dravid and Greg Chappell there. When Greg Chappell took over the mantle of the coach, and there was a power split between Greg and Ganguly. That was when probably the only occasion where you felt like the captain wasn't the one who was running things in Indian cricket. And then after that, it was MS Dhoni again. He was his own man, and Gary Kirsten was obviously a very good coach, but it was Dhoni's team. I mean, it and he was very much the main man who was running running things. And obviously, since then, it's Virat Kohli. And again, we saw that when India appointed Anil Kumble as a coach, and there were who's again a very strong-headed personality. There were clashes between him and Virat Kohli, and then he ultimately got sacked. And Virat Kohli has got Ravi Shastri, whom he gets along well with, and they can kind of function quite well together. Uh, and yeah, so I think you look at India, that's one aspect of it. Whereas for a team like Australia, for example, we've had different phases. Like when Ricky Ponting was the captain, I think he was again. I think he was the boss, and he basically was controlling the selections and all the decision making, but probably not quite to the same degree as an Indian captain, for example. I remember during the 2010-11 Ashes, and that was when you know Ponting was coming towards the end of his captaincy. That was the last Test series that he actually captained, and after that, Australia lost that series quite badly, and he stepped down for Michael Clarke to take over. But during that series, Ricky Ponting was a big fan of Mitchell Johnson, and and Mitchell Johnson obviously had a terrible start to the series at the Gabba, where he was smashed all over the place by Alistair Cook and Jonathan Trott and Andrew Strauss in the second innings, and there was a conflict between the selectors and Ricky Ponting as to whether Mitchell Johnson should play the rest of the series. Then he was dropped at Adelaide. I think that was against Ricky Ponting's wishes, and Australia got hammered in that test as well. Like at the Gabba, they still managed to draw the test match, but they lost by an innings at Adelaide. And then Mitchell Johnson was brought back again on Ponting's behest uh, at Perth, and then he was the one who actually won them the test match. And then he went on to play the next couple of test matches, was disappointing. So that was again one instance where there was some sort of a conflict between the captain and the coach. Uh, and yeah, I mean, and after that, Michael Clarke took over as captain. And again, Michael Clarke was, for the first couple of years of his captaincy, Michael Clarke was the boss of Australian cricket. He was literally the final authority on everything that was going on. He basically handpicked the teams, and you know and then that it all came to a head in India with that homework incident in Mohali, where there was 4 players got banned for not doing homework, something by Mickey Arthur and Michael Clarke, and then that was a quite a tumultuous tour for Australia. Australia lost 4-0, and then they went to the Champions Trophy in 2013 as a very broken unit. And then we had that incident where David Warner punched Joe Root in a bar, and he got banned from the rest of the tournament after the first game, and that was the end of Mickey Arthur as a coach. And from there on, uh, Darren Lehman was appointed the coach for the Ashes. Just 15 days prior to the Ashes in England, Darren Lehman was appointed as the coach, and all the powers were stripped away from Michael Clarke as a captain. Like he was no longer officially the selector, because the board felt that he was misusing his powers. He was, you know, preferring his favorites. Because there are like multiple anecdotes. I'm not so sure if all of them are true, but there are rumors that like Michael Hussey's premature retirement was partly down to not quite having a particularly cordial relationship with Michael Clarke. We all know that Michael Clarke and Shane Watson have never really been the best of buddies. There is obviously that well documented Simon Katich incident where Katich grabbed Clarke by his throat, I think, and that was when obviously Ponting was the captain, and then when Clarke took over the captaincy, Katich was jettisoned from the side and did not play again. So again, so that was when I think the real change was brought about in Australian cricket, and I think that 2013 Ashes when Darren Lehman was appointed as the coach. Since then, a captain has never really been the official selector of the Australian cricket team. He's always been on the periphery. I mean, captain obviously still gets his inputs, and I'm sure that you know a captain. I mean, when Michael Clough was captain, he captained subsequently for 2 years after that, and then retired after the 2015 Ashes. But I'm sure that he still had his still was getting his views across, but he did not have official authority on the selection table. That was like well illustrated during just before the 2014-15 Test series against India. Uh, Michael Clarke and the selectors had a clash over whether he should be playing in the starting 11 or not, because there were concerns over his fitness. He had injured himself during the Test series in the UAE, and he was asked by the selectors to play Sheffield Shield games to prove his fitness, and Michael Clark was adamant that he was fit and he was going to play regardless of whether he's able to prove his fitness or not. And he was going to be left out of the side. And then that tragic incident happened with Philip Hughes being, hit on the head and dying, and then that just changed the whole complexion of the thing. And then Michael Clark basically had to play the first test, even though he was not fit, and he went off injured midway through that test match, and then. Uh, Brad had him captain in the second innings, and then Steve Smith was appointed as captain for the rest of the series. So he was not fit, but he still had to play that test match because you know Australia needed their captain, needed their leader in times of crisis. That was the only reason, right? Michael Clark eventually ended up playing that test match, but that was again that incident just before that tragic incident took place. That was again another illustration of the clash of powers between the boardroom or the team management and the captain. And again, after that, when Steve Smith became the captain, after the 2015 Ashes, there have been, I mean, there haven't really been any like major clashes between the captain and the coach or the captain and the team management, but he was never officially a part of the, officially a part of the selection panel. And yeah, I think, I mean, as a tactician, like you look at Ponting, who's I think had such a great team that it did not really matter, and it's very. I think I always think it's very difficult to judge captaincy when you've got players of that caliber, because you often just have to turn up and they'll win the matches anyways. Uh, During the latter part of his captaincy, he was like his own batting return started to recede, and he's not quite the same player anymore, and he did not quite have the teammates to bail him out, and the results started to deteriorate. Although they were still like Australia was still one of the top 2 or 3 sides in the world. They're not like mediocre, but they were not no longer the dominant force. Then Michael Clark took over, and I think he was like more of a tactician than Ricky Ponting. Like he had his own ideas. He was, you know, I think a very hands-on captain, very aggressive. Who almost like he almost took pride in his captaincy being something that could be a differentiating factor. Like, I remember that test in the West Indies in 2012, where Australia, I think it was the test match was, I think at Barbados, the first test, and Australia were actually trailing by something like 50 or 40 runs in the first innings. And Michael Clark was still very early into his captaincy days in that time. So it's like it was less than a year that he had taken over the captaincy, and he took the big call of declaring his first innings 50 runs behind, because the time was running out and Australia needed to post result, because it was against the West Indies, and Australia were really expected to win that series quite comfortably. So not even a drawn test would have been quite an embarrassing result for Clark. And he took that brave decision to declare like 40-50 runs behind in the first innings, and his bowlers stepped up and bowled West Indies out, and Australia actually ended up winning that test match by chasing like 190 odd in the fourth 190 odd in the fourth innings, and that was hailed as a masterstroke. And he again did that in Hyderabad when like Australia were batting first in in the first innings, and they were 9 down, and Michael Clark decided to you know declare the innings because he thought that it would be better to have a few overs at the Indian batsmen late in the day to just so as to unsettle them and maybe nick out a couple of early wickets rather than whatever set off the last wicket partnership might add. But obviously that did not work out. Australia was thrashed by an innings in that test and in that series as a whole. And that was when Michael Clark's captaincy as well as his man management over the whole homework gate incident that was widely criticized. So he's again, Michael Clark is someone I think who's gone through his ups and downs. He's been hailed as a tactical genius. He's also gone through phases where his man management and his sometimes overly abrupt decision making has been under the scanner. There was also the 2013 Ashes, like the fifth test of that Ashes at the Oval, where the series was obviously already decided. England were leading 3-0, and it was pretty much a dead rubber, and the pitch was extremely flat. And the first 3 or 4 days, like they were, I think, among the worst bits of Test cricket that I've seen. The Test match was going absolutely nowhere. And then suddenly on day 5, Michael Clark comes up with a very funky declaration where he asks England to chase 200 in 2 sessions, which was a very gettable target. And then Kevin Peterson played an absolute blinder, scored a 35 ball 50, and England were well on course to chase that. And then ultimately they were still England needed like 20 or 25 runs to win. And then Michael Clark and his team started appealing for bad light So that was again quite an embarrassing moment for Clark, that he had declared early to make a match out of the whole thing, you know, so as to get a result, and then ultimately he had to fall on his own sword, and ultimately the umpires did agree, and bad light was handed out, and the test match ended in a draw. But that, if Australia had lost that test match, then that would have been pretty embarrassing for Clark, because that was that made absolutely no sense, because Australia had no chance of bowling England out on that flat pitch within 2 sessions, but that just gave them a chance of winning the test match. So that was again, you often praise captains for the aggressive captaincy, but I think it's about being prudent. Like, you have to analyze the risk and rewards. Like the test at Barbados, where he declared 50 runs behind, there was a fair enough chance of Australia winning that test match. But at this time around, this was more like just a show off kind of thing, where he just wanted to show that I'm aggressive, and I wanted to make a sporting declaration. It was more like it was more like he cared about his personal image of being an aggressive captain, rather than actually acting in the best interest of the team. So, and after that, Steve Smith has, I think, has always been a very, very pragmatic captain. He's even in the series, very first series that he took over as captain from Michael Clark in the 2014-15 series against India, when he was standing in for Michael Clark. I remember his declarations at Melbourne and Sydney. They were extremely, extremely conservative, and that probably was cost Australia the chance, to win that series 3-0 or 4-0. And then, after that, against, I never really thought much of Steve Smith as a tactician. Even in limited overs cricket, his record as a captain is poor, but it's not just the win-loss ratio. I always felt that his team selections, which I personally think is the most important aspect of being, a captain, particularly in Test match cricket, and obviously in limited overs cricket as well, because I think with the way the limited overs cricket is played these days, you need players to perform a variety of roles, and sometimes it's people people don't quite understand it, and still look at cricket in the traditional lens, where you know you need those dynamic cricketers in the middle order, low middle order, who might not necessarily be the most consistent ones, but you need those guys who can make the difference in high scoring games. And that's something that I think Steve Smith was not particularly good at. Like, he did not really, I think, back players well. Again, as I said, he was not officially a part of the selection panel, so I'm not too sure how much input he had in the team selections. But under him and Darren Lee, Australia's team limited over side declined, like, considerably after the 2015 World Cup. And in Test cricket, obviously, Australia was still winning at home. We won New Zealand, which I think was a very, I think still remains the most impressive achievement of Australian cricket over the last 5-6 years, where Australia now, despite missing Mitchell Stark, and Pat Cummins was not a part of the Test side back then. It was largely a slightly weakened bowling attack, and they outplayed New Zealand completely. That was, I think, one instance where I thought Steve Smith had his tactics spot on. His field placements, and the manner in which Australia choked the batting side. Then, we had that terrible run in 2016 where we lost 5 Test matches in a row in Sri Lanka and against South Africa at home, and there were question marks over the captain or the coach, and but again, the captain was the only one who was scoring runs in that team, so he could not really be sacked. And ultimately, it was like, and there were changes in the team, and there was a different approach that was adopted by the new team management, where they switched away from the typical Australian aggressive style and tried to play, I think, a more of a waiting game. And that's I think one of the reasons why they were so competitive in India, where Alan Border often says that in the subcontinent, to lose patience is to lose the battle. And that was the mantra that I think Australia adopted on the 2017 tour, where they were quite patient. They actually played the subcontinental style of cricket. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why they were so competitive. They were eventually beaten by, I think, a much better side in the conditions. But that, again, I think then can be considered as quite a considerable achievement, the way Australia competed throughout that whole tour. And then, we also, what happened, like, in 2018 with the homework gate, and since then it's been Tim Paine who's captaining the side, and I think his role as a captain is like completely different to The rest, he's clearly not in the side due to cricketing merit. He's not one of the top 11 cricketers in Australia. He's not the best wicket-keeper batsman in Australia, irrespective of what the PR machinery tells you, because he was not even the Tasmanian Sheffield Shield side prior to his appointment as Australian captain. So I think right now the role of the Australian cricket captain is more to act as the good boy, act as statesman rather than as an actual cricket captain. And that's the reason why Tim Paine continues to be in the job despite him not really performing all that well, and despite the team suffering some pretty embarrassing results. Like Australia have now lost two consecutive home series to India under Tim Paine's captaincy. And again, obviously, as we said earlier, the captains are not responsible for the results, but some of the tactics, and I think I would hold the coach equally responsible for this. Especially in the recent series, like in 2018, we had a depleted team side, so you know, you could probably give them a pass. That was still, the early stages of their tenure. But in last summer, again, what was a heavily depleted Indian side? Australia had a full strength side, and that was an absolutely inexplicable series defeat. And Australia's tactics, like the team selection, Mitchell Starc continuing to play all four test matches. I've spoken enough on that, so I won't go into that in detail. Nathan Lyon, continuing to bowl, that negative line, on middle stump instead of trying to get batsmen out. That's again something that's been widely, criticized by the Australian media as well. But for some reason, the Australian team management or captain, they were quite reluctant to change their tactics. They were reluctant to change their team and try different bowlers out, and ultimately it ended in an absolutely embarrassing series defeat. And despite that, his position remains unquestioned. Like there's absolutely no talk of him stepping down, and he's apparently going to retire after the Ashes at home. Whether as a hero as a villain, or as a villain, I think that will only be determined by the result of that series. But I still think he's had way too long at the captaincy than he deserved. But that's just how it is in cricket right now, where mediocrity is accepted, and yeah, right, like the off-field PR stuff has become more important than that cricket. So that's disappointing.
Yeah, you've pretty much given a run through of what exactly has happened, gone right, gone wrong in Australian cricket over the past, say, 18, 20 years. And you've given a proper, deep run through of what's gone right, what's gone wrong for each of the captains, as you mentioned there. So, yeah, I guess there's not much more to add in terms of what you said, because you were very, very thorough in what you said in terms of what went right for some of the captains, what didn't go right for some of the other captains. So, yeah, it's fair to say that each of the captains have had their own highs and lows when it comes to Australian cricket over the last 20 years. And yeah, but you still had your fair share of success as well. So yeah. So going over to you, Gurkirat, if you have a few anecdotes to add in terms of what you feel in terms of captaincy, what would you say? If there's any examples or something you want to illustrate specifically. You're on mute.
I'll talk of a few. I'll talk of a few recent examples because that would be easier for people to recall. Now, uh, Sanket spoke about how Steve Smith isn't the greatest of captains tactically, and I completely agree. If you look at the last IPL, when he was leading the Rajasthan Royals, he chose to give the 19th over to Jaydev Unadkat ahead of Jofra Archer, and that pretty much finished off the game at that moment only versus AB de Villiers. So, and it's not been a one-odd occasion. There's been other occasions as well when they were defending around 150 only versus, say, someone like a Sunrise Hyderabad, and Jofra had already dismissed both Bairstow and Warner. There was full reason to give Jofra another over in the power play itself to try and get Manish Pandey or Vijay Shankar, but he didn't. He tried to save the overs till the end when the match was pretty much done and dusted. So I'm not saying that had he done that, he like Rajasthan would have definitely won, but it's what the tactics that you play with and that you go ahead with that sort of defines captaincy for me. I think captaincy is all about, regardless of which format as you play, as to what chances are you giving your team or any player in your side to succeed. It could mean giving someone some extra confidence or probably rejigging the batting order. Sometimes it is dependent upon matchups and sometimes upon instincts. I think what has happened in T20s is that it's now becoming more and more based on matchups and what the numbers are telling you. But still, what good captains are able to do is they're able to figure out when to rely on the matchups and when to move away from it. Someone like MS Dhoni does it brilliantly. Like if you look at the 2011 World Cup only in isolation, he started with Yusuf Pathan because Yusuf Pathan had come off a brilliant 100 versus South Africa. But when Yusuf Pathan was not scoring runs, he had to bring in Suresh Raina. And it's not that Suresh Raina had done anything brilliant. I think in the last 6 games prior to the quarterfinal, he had only scored 120 odd runs. But he chose to drop Suresh Raina and brought in Yusuf Pathan. Now, that because he thought that Yusuf has had enough chances and maybe Raina deserves to play because it will add some dimension in the batting lineup. He will probably be able to give a few overs. He's a left-hander, etc., etc. But it's a different thing that Raina performed well in both that quarter-final and in the semi-final. Had he failed in those games and India lost, then the whole world would have come down on MS Dhoni that why would you do such a major change in the quarter-final? It's not that on basis of that one game, MS Dhoni becomes a very good or a great captain. For what it's worth, he's always had the conviction in whatever moves he's taken, and regardless of them, giving him instant success or instant failure, he's chosen to stuck with it. And I think which has been the reason why he's been so successful, and which began his downfall as well. Because one thing that was constant in MS Dhoni's captaincy in that period between 2007 to 2014 was that India kept going back to same players. I think one of the most disappointing highlights of MS Dhoni's captaincy was when RP Singh came on to bowl in Oval in 2011 off a vacation. Uh, I don't think in India is ever going to have something like that in the next 20 30 years, because one, fitness is given a lot of reference now. The other is what where Virat is different is that he doesn't like to sort of go back to the same set of players. You could say probably he's a little impatient, which I think he was initially, but now he's understood that he needs to take that time. But with MS Dhoni, India actually rotated a certain amount of players only. Someone like an Amit Mishra never got a consistent run under MS Dhoni. It was Jadeja, Ashwin, and Raina doing the job. Murli Vijay coming back in and out of the T20 side. Someone like Robin Uthappa in his prime form in the IPL never got a consistent run in the Indian side. Even when Shikhar Dhawan wasn't a great T20 batsman, we had the likes of Ajinkya Rahane as well, both in 2014 and in 2016 in the squad. And someone like Suresh Raina, who I think, for an Indian batsman, was ahead of its time in T20, wasn't necessarily used the best way whenever India played the World T20 is what I felt. So there were a lot of good things about MS Dhoni, but I think those same good things turned out to be the reasons for his failure later on. So, like I said, I think captaincy is just about ensuring that you are able to give your team or your players the best chance of success, but it doesn't guarantee success. What people confuse it with, that okay, a move is successful only when it's become it's given result. Going back to the 2011 World Cup once again, Ravichandran Ashwin was India's best bowler in the quarterfinal. He took 2 for 40, dismissed the dangerous Shane Watson, and then even bowl at the death to get Ponting out. But he was dropped for the game versus Pakistan in Mohali, where 30 overs of spin by Pakistan had allowed India only 120 odd runs and 3 wickets. I remember Mohammad Hafiz bowled a 10 over spell, Shahid Afridi bowled a 10 over spell, Sayyad Ajmal, and India went in with only one frontline spinner in Harbhajan Singh. And they had brought in Ashish Nehra, who was not in the greatest of forms. He copped a lot of flack and criticism for the game versus South Africa, where he couldn't defend those 13 odd runs and went for runs. And it's something else. It's another thing that Ashish Nehra turned out to be the best Indian bowler on that night when he took 2 for 33. But again, had that move not worked, would MS Dhoni probably be seen as the great or the good captain everybody sees him to be? Probably not. So people really need to realize that captaincy also has to do a lot with luck and what team that you have. Like how Sanket mentioned, that someone like a Ricky Ponting, you can never judge how he was as a captain. And there's something which a lot of people have said as well. I remember Jeffrey Boycott saying that his mum could captain that side to the World Cup, and he was probably right, because at that point of time, that Australian 11 was the world 11. You had 11 match winners, and then you had four more match winners sitting on the bench. So you just look at the margins by which Australia won each and every game in the 2007 World Cup. You could have had anybody captain the game, but when you're winning by those margins, I think the closest margin for Australia in that World Cup was some uh, 50 or 70 odd runs. I think they beat even a good team. I can't remember it by 200 odd runs. They beat South Africa pretty convincingly in the semi-finals. So they were pretty much ruthless. So with that kind of a team, you can have anyone as captain, and you'll do well. Apart from this, someone like a Joe Root. Uh, I don't think England would have had much of a chance in this Test series anyway. But I don't think Joe Root gave his side the best chance. If you look back at the second Test in Chennai, England had lost that game after the first innings itself, but I don't think England helped themselves because Oli Stone had only bowled 7 overs or 8 overs in the second innings when India were six down for only 100 odd, and Ravichandran Ashwin had started attacking the spinners. Oli Stone should have come into the attack straight away. He was missing. Then look back at the fourth test. Jack Leach had dismissed Pujara before that innings four times, and Rohit also five times, I think. But Jack Leach didn't even get a bowl in the morning session. It was Ben Stokes and Jimmy Anderson. So these are the things that you judge captaincy by. I don't think even if Jack Leach had started, probably the result would have been much different. India would probably still would have come on top and won the Test match. But it's about giving your team the best chance possible, which I think a lot of captains fail to do it. Win and loss is something which is very different. I think sometimes Virat Kohli also doesn't give his side the best chance to win, but they still win because of the quality that they have. So I think the one thing that we need to start judging captains by is what chance or how good of a chance do they give their team to succeed. If they do that enough, I think you're a good captain. But if you don't do that and your team still wins or anything, it just comes down to the team's quality.
I think this is where
Yeah, I
MS
agree. I think
Dhoni's
as you mentioned,
principle. I think this is where the MS Dhoni's philosophy, which he was often criticized for and he was often mocked for in social media, but I think he was absolutely spot on. That captaincy is about the process. It's not about the results. Captaincy is about not winning matches, but it's about giving yourself the best chance to win. I think the same is kind of true even in football, where I think people need to reevaluate the way they judge managers, where they just often look at their honors list and they say that the manager who won so much trophies, he must be great, and someone else is not quite as good. But that obviously depends on the quality of the team that you're managing, and I think that's the same goes to cricket. So yeah, I mean, I think and I think probably more so in cricket, because I think in cricket, like, tactics matter even less, and individual quality, more often than not, comes out on top. So I think this is where MS Dhoni, even though I don't subscribe to a lot of his views about captaincy, but I think his general idea about process being more important than results, I think that was spot on. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people, mocked him for that. But that was absolutely, spot on.
One captain that doesn't find a lot of mention in cricketing circles is Mashrafi Murtaza. Probably because he comes from Bangladesh. Bangladesh haven't had really won much, but if you see what he's done with that Bangladesh side, if you are able to judge it on a relative scale, then you'd realize that what has been his impact as a captain. He probably lost his best years as a bowler even before 2010 when he had that knee surgery. But if you look at Bangladesh in 2011 World Cup, if you look at Bangladesh in the 2015 World Cup, the way they played, you could
2017
see,
Champions Trophy.
yeah, 2017 Champions Trophy. You could see that they had bought into the philosophy that Mashrafi Murtaza had. Everyone was sort of outperforming and doing better than what they could, and I felt it had a lot to do with Mashrafi Murtaza's man management, and I'd say something similar about Darren Sammy as well, because West Indies were always a side which had a lot of individuals with immense amount of brilliance, but they could never sort of get together as a side. Just to bring them together was something which was leadership in itself, and that is why Dan Sammy commands that respect in the West Indies cricketing circles. He was probably he was probably like Tim Payne, what Tim Payne is in current Australian circles. Not the best player, but he could bring in the side together and he could do also had a little bit of luck with himself, because in 2016 T20 World Cup he won all the tosses and chose to chase in all the games. And you could say that that them losing to Afghanistan in the last league game also probably helped them to chink out a few issues that they had. So without luck, no captain can achieve any amount of success. I've always believed that. But at the same time, there needs to be understanding of a few basic things, understanding how you can get the best out of your players, and understanding the game itself. Because uh, you know uh, even if I look at, say, someone like a Rohit Sharma, over the last two seasons, I've felt that he's become a better captain, because in 2018 and in 2019, there were games where he left Jasprit Bumrah for too late. uh, the opposition needs 25 odd runs in the last 4 overs, and Jasprit Bumrah has 2 overs left. He'll probably come and bowl those overs for 10, but you've essentially, lost the game anyway. So this is all. These are also a few things that captains need to improve upon, as to how they can use their bowlers well, and use their resources well. So like I said, someone like Mashrafi Murtaza is probably a better captain than maybe someone who's won a trophy, because Ricky Ponting winning that World Cup trophy with 2007 was pretty much a given, than Mashrafi Murtaza reaching the quarterfinals of the 2015 World Cup with the side that he had. So you also have to judge captaincy with some amount of relativity. Like what side do you have? What kind of players did you have? And that I think that goes a lot as well.
I
Yeah,
also think I think
yeah.
Yeah, I think one good thing that Gurkirat mentioned, I think, and that's about Darren Sammy winning tosses. I think toss is often a very underrated aspect in cricket, and something that I don't think gets discussed enough of while discussing the captains. Firstly, I think particularly in Test match cricket, I don't really follow a lot of T20 cricket, so I'm not quite sure about the importance of toss in T20 cricket. But my guess would be that it is probably less important in T20 cricket because it's obviously such a short format, and you know the conditions don't really change over the course of 40 overs. So I'm guessing that toss might be less important in T20 cricket. But obviously, you feel free to correct me if I'm wrong because I don't really follow any T20 cricket in the first place. But I think in Test cricket, I've just checked the numbers, and over the last, I checked these numbers last year, I think during the lockdown and before the resumption of cricket. So these are numbers prior to the England West Indies Test series that took place last summer. But in the last 100 or Test matches, like the side batting first, and I'm talking about the touring side, like it was something like 25 wins for the side batting second, and 80 odd wins in like 130 odd Test matches, and 80 odd wins for the side batting first. And I'm talking about the when the home side wins the toss, whereas when the touring side wins the toss, it's like 50-50 when they bat first. But when they lose the toss and when the home side wins the toss, it's like 25-80 or something. So I think that just tells you the impact that toss has in cricket and Test cricket, but in particular these days, that what is normally a 50-50 game, if the touring side wins the toss, can turn into like a 25-75 or 25-20-80 game when they lose the toss. So the toss, I think, is something that you often need to look at, and that's, I think, where Virat Kohli has actually been quite unlucky when it comes to playing overseas. That is the toss record is not great anyways, but overseas it's particularly bad, and they've only lost one test, I think, in which he's won the toss as captain. That was the day and night test at Adelaide last year. So that is again something that I think needs to be taken into consideration while judging the results. And one more thing, I think the captains need to be taking the right decisions at the toss as well, because I think a bad decision at the toss can be almost as costly and as a bad team selection, for example, which tends to get criticized more, and rightly so. I think team selection and the correct decision making in the toss is often, for me, are the two most important aspects of Test match captaincy, because field settings and bowling changes and all that. Firstly, I think in Test match cricket you don't really have a restriction on the number of overs that a bowler can bowl. So yeah, if your best bowlers can bowl more overs, then the captains generally tend to bank on them. And obviously, you have a change of session every 2 hours, anyways, so where you can discuss the tactics with the team management, and so it's not really a case of the captain, having to think on his feet. Whereas, obviously in limited overs cricket, it's different because it's fast paced and you don't really get time to think, which is why captaincy is obviously far more important in limited overs cricket. But in Test cricket, I don't think on-field captaincy matters, in fact, at all. I think, but what matters is the decisions that you take, off the field with regards to the team selection, because I think team selection plays obviously a huge role. Even though it's, as you pointed out, one player makes only a 9% difference, but if you get two players wrong, then you're making a 20% difference to the side. Like if you make two wrong selections, like for example, India did in the first test at Adelaide, where they played Prithvi Shaw on the side and they played Riddhiman Saha ahead of Rishabh Pant. That was, I think, that had quite a substantial impact on the result of the game in what was, you know, actually quite a close test match, because even though Australia won by 10 wickets, 8 wickets in the end, that India had a first innings lead of nearly 50 in the first innings. So that was, the test was on a knife edge for most of it before that spectacular collapse. So I think, getting a couple of bad selections, a couple of selections wrong, that can have a pretty substantial impact on the outcome of the game. And I think getting the the decision wrong at the toss can have an even bigger impact, as I just illustrated the numbers. Like if you bat first, then you have a 50-50% chance of winning when you're obviously touring, and when you bat second, that just chance probably comes down to like 15-20%. So that I think goes to show you that I think making the right decision toss. And I think this is where, someone like Jason Holder, someone like Jason Holder has been particularly culpable. Like he almost always chooses to bowl first, which is something that I don't really understand why, they do that in spite of, losing time and again, doing the same thing. They just keep repeating the same mistakes, which I think is absolutely inexplicable. I think, if you make a mistake once, then that's fine. But if you just repeating the same mistake time and time again, then it's hard to have much sympathy for him. But I was criticizing Jason Holder, but then, you know he was replaced by
Brathwaite,
Craig Brathwaite
Brathwaite
recently, and
just
Craig Bra- e- even Brathwaite chose to bowl first in both the tests against Sri Lanka. So, I don't know whether who's making the decision, whether it's Jason Holder who's taking the calls, or whether it's the team management who's taking the calls with regards to the toss and with regards to team selections. So I think that is also something that needs to be understood. Who's taking these decisions off the field, the dynamic of the team management. Where, when you're talking about a team like India, you know that it's Virat Kohli is making the calls. But when it comes to teams like West Indies, we don't really know who's the power center, who's making all the big calls. Like for Australia, I've always felt like ever since Justin Langer took over the mantle as coach, and Tim Paine was the captain. Tim Paine has always been a sidekick, and it's Justin Langer who's the boss, who's running the entire thing. But when Tim Paine chose to bowl first at the Oval in 2019, which was an absolutely catastrophic decision, Justin Langer said that he wasn't even aware of it, and that he and Steve Waugh, who was with the side as a mentor during that tour, they were absolutely flabbergasted when Tim Paine chose to bowl first. So that was like Tim Paine, pretty much taking the decision on his own without consulting the team management, which I think was quite shocking, given that Tim Paine is not necessarily, a particularly big name, or he's not a Steve Smith, or he's not a Virat Kohli, who's really, commands a place in the side as a player alone. And so I think I thought that the decisions might have been taken by the team management, but it was surprising to know that Tim Paine does have, considerable amount of power, and he was the one who's taking the decisions. So again, I think we've got to understand the team dynamic as well, and that's often, I think, quite underestimated. Like people just tend to blame the captain, but often it's someone else who's pulling the strings from behind.
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of factors, as both of you mentioned. The factor of luck, the factor of guys who you ended up selecting in the 11, or the tactics you've been chosen to employ. Unless the guy who actually is going on to employ or execute these tactics is good enough or is able to do it on that particular day, until that happens, you're not really sure whether that thing works or not, and that obviously plays a role in the result and eventually in the way you're perceived as a captain. So yeah, as you guys mentioned, captaincy is a very delicate topic in terms of there's only so much you can control, but still there's a significant amount of things you can control. But once you've controlled whatever are controllable, even after that, there's got to be certain things which has to happen for you to be on the right side of the result and eventually go on to be considered a good captain or a successful captain. So completely agree with what you guys mentioned. So I guess we've had a very, very comprehensive discussion about what we feel the role of a captain is when it comes to cricket. I mean, I know that Sanket's given a few analogies with regards to Australian cricket or even football as to how much of a role, how much there's only so much a captain can do. So yeah, we've had a very comprehensive discussion about that. So thanks a lot, guys. Thanks a lot to Sanket. Thanks a lot to Gurkirat. I hope you guys enjoy the show. And with that, I'd like to
just
wrap it
just
up.
Just
Yeah,
something that I want to add in the end about what Sanket said about the team dynamics or the management dynamics. In this year's IPL, what we have seen is that captains are mostly someone who are just executing the plans. And there's something that I felt even in the last IPL, especially with setups like Delhi Capitals and Punjab, where definitely the coach was running the show and captain was just following the plan. Is I think another thing which how you judge a captain is how good is he able to manage the situation when plan A is failing. uh, Plan A is every team is going to come up, come prepared with their plan A's. But how good are you going to be when your plan A is not working? Do you have a plan B? Do you have a plan C? Is something I think what is very very crucial in judging a limited overs captain. And I think in that regard, in the IPL, there are only three captains: MS Dhoni, Rohit Sharma, and Virat Kohli. Everyone else, whether it be someone like Sanju Samson, Rishabh Pant, or even Shreyas Iyer, or KL Rahul, or to the extent of even David Warner, who ended up saying that dropping Manish Pandey wasn't his call, and Kane Williamson not being promoted wasn't his call. It sort of shows you that probably in T20 cricket, maybe later on or in the coming years, it could take the shape of how football managers control the tactics, and then the captains are just executing it. May not completely reach that stage because it's still a captain's game, but I think we are slowly moving to that stage where the role of an on-field captain will become more and more less, especially in the shorter formats.
yeah. As you mentioned, there's only so much, especially in a short format game. You've got really 20 overs, so you kind of plan. There's only certain ways the game can flow, right? If you look at it from a decision tree point of view,
This is why I often feel like this is why my this no why I often feel that for me the 50 overs format is, I think, is the one where I think the captain has the biggest prominence, because I think in Test cricket, as Gurkirat mentioned, Test captaincy, on-field captaincy is pretty much, I think, irrelevant. You can say that. I mean, I wouldn't even say it's less important. On-field captaincy, maybe unless it's a very close game or something, it's often irrelevant. Like the tactics of the field are what matters. But on-field decision making, bowling changes, and all, they're pretty much stereotyped. And in T20, this format is so short that things happen so quick. And again, you don't really have a lot of options with regards to you've only got four overs of your bowlers. So sometimes you often end up having to take gambles, which you're not necessarily what you would classify as tactical masterclass. It just happens that you take a decision which might end up being lucky. Whereas I think 50 overs is a format where you have to like you firstly you've got to manage 10 overs of the fifth bowler, whereas in T20 it's just 4 overs. Obviously, that's 4 overs in a T20 game is quite different to 4 overs in a 50 over game. But still, I think managing those 10 overs and knowing when to squeeze those overs in, and knowing when to bring back your strike bowlers in T20, you generally see that you give again I don't watch a lot of T20, so this might be wrong, but my perception of T20 is that you often the premier fast bowler bowls 2 overs with the new ball and 2 overs at the death. Like that's generally how they're used. Sometimes maybe you might use them for 1 over in the middle, but that's generally how they're used. Whereas in 50 over cricket, you often use them in 3 or 4 spells, and you've got to manage the whole thing. I think quite in a sophisticated way. So I think 50 overs cricket, I think, is the one where captains on field captaincy, I think, becomes more important. Whereas in T20, like you guys mentioned, the coach or the on field or the off field management has a bigger prominence, particularly in the franchise game, because franchises generally hire well renowned coaches and they have specialized data analytics department who do all the research into the matchups and all that sort of thing. So often the captain is given ready-made information, like if you have a left hand in the crease, then you bowl an off spinner. But that's not necessarily something that the captain that you would describe as a captain's master stroke. It's something that's often pre-decided by the team management. Whereas I think in 50 over cricket, I think for me that's the format where I think captaincy is most important on the field.
yeah, agreed. Again, I mean, as you guys mentioned, it's again there's shorter the format is, most of the things are pre-decided, especially in T20 cricket. You can kind of decide where you want to use your premier bowler, whether it's the start, whether it's the end, and where you want to play your, I mean, where you want to use your leg spinners, your off spinners against which batsmen. So many of the things are predetermined, and that's something what Gurkeet mentioned. Going forward, you may have the coach is playing a significant role in deciding what happens before the game. The captain training, just going out there and executing whatever the plans are. So he as an individual does not really have much to do. So yeah, I completely agree with what you guys were saying in that way. And with that, I guess we can wrap the show up. So thanks a lot to Sanket, thanks a lot to Gurkeet. It's been a pleasure having you on, both of you. And I hope you guys enjoyed the show. And thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for watching. And please do subscribe to the channel as well. And yeah, thank you, guys.
Pleasure.